I had used Peter Drucker's works, his philosophy, his books, all my career. I had discovered him long, long ago, and I thought, he thinks he's writing for corporations. He's writing just for us. I loved the way he distilled language. And so 5 years after I had come to New York, and those remarkable people had transformed the organization, and I received an invitation to a reception and dinner. New York University President John Bradamus invited 50 foundation presidents and some presidents of large nonprofits. University Club, 5:30. Now, if you grew up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, 5:30 is 5:30. So I get to the University Club. I walk into this big, empty room. I am alone with 2 bartenders. I turn around. Behind me is a man. Obviously, if you grew up in Vienna, 5:30 is 5:30. And he said, "I am Peter Drucker." And I was so stunned because I knew in that mob I would never actually meet him. So instead of saying, "How do you do?" I just looked at him and I said, "Do you realize how important you are to the Girl Scouts?" He said, "No, tell me." And I said, "Go to any one of our local 335 Girl Scout councils. You'll find a shelf of your books. Open our corporate planning management monograph and our strategic plan. You'll find your philosophy there." He said, "Oh, you are very daring. I would be afraid to do that. Tell me, does it work?" And I said, "Wonderfully. And I've been trying to get up enough courage to call you to say, may I come to Claremont and have 1 hour of your time? Because we have in place everything you say the great effective organization must have in place. And I would like to come to Claremont, lay this out before you, and then talk to you about how do we take the lead in this society and just blast off into the future." He said, "Why should both of us travel? I'll be in New York in a month or so. I will give you a day of my time." Just then, Dr. Bradamus and his entourage arrived. They swept Peter away, and I looked at my watch. I said, "In 4.5 minutes, I've met Peter Drucker, and I have a day of his time." From then on, for the next 8 years, he gave us 2 or 3 days of his time. But before he spent that day with us, he studied us in a very intense way, but not at 830 3rd Avenue in New York, out in the field where the people were. And by the time he arrived in New York, he knew us very well. So that morning, I knew I couldn't keep him to myself, of course. So we had the National Board and National staff members, and I could tell that when I just looked at our group, I could tell they expected him to say, "You've transformed the organization. You're wonderful." He stood there, thanked us for permitting him to be there. Then he looked at that leadership group and said, "You do not see yourselves life-size. You do not appreciate the significance of the work you do. For we live in a society that pretends to care about its children, and it does not." And I'm sitting beside him, and I want to rise and refute it, and I couldn't think of anything to say. Last year, I called Peter and said, 1981, you said to the Girl Scout leadership, we live in a society that pretends to care about its children, and it does not. Do you still feel the same way? Silence then. Has anything changed? So those marvelous 8 years, he had an incredible generosity, but he taught us how to distill language, and he wrote marvelous things about us. New York Times best managed organization in the United States, and they said, "You mean nonprofit?" He said, "No, I mean any organization." The whole thing, mission focused, values based, demographics driven, and we had our house in order. So he has been a wonderful influence upon the organization. At one point he said, "Tough, hard-working women can do anything." That was not exactly the way we would describe ourselves, but anything Peter said about us, we were grateful.